The best of Money Matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. The Ministry of Social and Family Development released its Family Trends Report 2025 just yesterday and might raise a few eyebrows. Marriages dipped in 2024. Fertility rates remained at a historic low of 0.97, and more ever married women are reaching their 40s without children. On the other hand, there's also some encouraging news. Early marriage dissolutions are down, especially among Muslim couples, and many families are showing high resilience even as the social landscape shifts. So what do all these numbers really tell us? Is Singapore's idea of family simply changing with the times? What should we read between the lines, and how should policymakers respond? Well, to help us unpack all of this is Dr. Tan Poh Lin, who is a senior research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies at the National University of Singapore. Hi, Dr. Tan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Dr. Tan, fewer couples tied the knot last year with more than 10% from the record high number back in 2022. What do you think are the key drivers behind the drop in marriages in 2024?
There are a couple of things going on here. One of the key statistics that you see in the report is actually also that people are getting married at a later age. So there is increase in the age at marriage. So one of the reasons why we see a drop in the number of marriages is actually because people are starting to postpone their marriages, hence the higher age at marriage. This is also called a tempora or tempo effect. So there is a push forward in the future, all these marriages that people wanted to have. So that's one side of it. I think the other side also is actually just as you might expect, that the economic climate is uncertain. We're in the middle of a trade war, and that the past few years have had other kinds of sources of economic challenges. So I think there's a couple of things going on here that may help to explain the declining marital rate.
Right. Then should we be comparing 2024 numbers to the 2022 peak, given that, 2022 was an unusual post-pandemic rebound year? I mean, could that have skewed year-on-year comparisons?
I think that's a great point. It kind of speaks to the point I was trying to make about this so-called tempo effect. Because what we see for 2022 is the opposite of what we might be looking at today. In 2022, remember, that was the year that we just kind of came off a lot of these restrictions on group gatherings, right? So people are pushed all their marriages up to this point. So what you had, it was a tempo effect where a lot of people pushed their marriages to 2022. So we had a jump at that point. And now we're seeing the reverse of that tempo effect. So I think you're making a good point. It's not maybe a very fair comparison because we're coming from, as you said, a peak and comparing that to a kind of a more normal year.
Definitely. I mean, looking at the current figures right now, then, do you think that this is a short-term dip or part of a longer-term trend?
If you take this comparison between what we just talked about, which is the tempo effect, which is how people are changing the timing of their marriage, but they're still getting married, it's just not right now in the future, right? Versus the opposite of that, which is what we call the quantum effect, which is actual people not going to get married, not just pushing it back, but not going to get married. I think that if you want to talk about whether it's a short-term or a long-term trend, it then depends a lot on whether this is a kind of a tempo effect, where we can recuperate these postponed marriages in the future, or whether this is a tempo effect where people are just not going to go through with any kind of marriage, not even in the future. I think that, to me, is a combination of both things happening. I think a lot of people probably would want to push back their marriages. They have a lot of reasons to do so. Maybe they're getting, going to get another degree or furthering their education. They could also be seeing that, hey, a lot of people are getting retrenched right now. I'm going to push back this idea of getting married. And it could translate into a long-term kind of like, well, it's just not going to happen because I've been pushing this back too much. So there's a kind of danger here. Whenever people push back marriages, they just, or even childbearing, it doesn't happen. So, a short-term thing, in other words, a short-term cause could become a long-term trend issue as well. I think that there's a lot of that going on.
Well, just diving deeper into this report, the number of civil marriages dropped across all age groups in 2024, but the decline was most significant among marriages involving brides and grooms aged 25 to 34. So, Dr. Tan, are we seeing any shifts in attitudes among younger Singaporeans that make the idea of marriage seem less urgent or even appealing to them?
I think that's kind of a paradoxical picture here. So, on the one hand, I think that marriage continues to be, for a lot of people, the ideal. So, 7 or 8 out of 10 young Singaporeans still say they see themselves getting married, they want to get married. So, it's still a very prevalent ideal. Okay. But if you ask them, hey, is this necessary to you? Do you think that is necessary? The answer might be quite surprising in that, even though they want to get married, a lot of people would say it's not strictly, maybe more closer to half of people say that is, really necessary to them. So what we're seeing is that is, like you said, actually perhaps a loss in urgency. So people might be saying, we want to get married, we look forward to getting married, but it's at the back of the queue relative to some other things that want to get done in life. Right? Maybe I need to get myself into a stable job. I need to finish a more education, get more degrees before I get married. So because people are shifting it back in terms of the list of priorities, we start to see that people who want to get married still don't get married. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of a complicated picture here.
Right, definitely. But I mean, how much of the decline can be attributed to delayed marriages rather than people choosing not to marry at all?
I think that to some extent, it is probably the fact that a lot of the decline is actually due to people not choosing not to get married. I wouldn't say that people are choosing not to get married, but they're not finding the opportunities, perhaps because they are really focused on other things around them. And by the time that they maybe meet somebody, it would be really further down the road to the point where, they may decide we maybe don't need to get married. I mean, this is what we call the interaction effect. When people push back and delay an event, sometimes it just doesn't happen. So I think a lot of it is actually due to the fact that, perhaps people feel that it's something that they want to do later, but they don't end up doing it. And the other side could be that people don't feel that it's, necessarily something that is for them. So that's really very concerning. I think that probably not just a delay effect is what I'm trying to say, taking a long time to say. It's not just delayed marriages. It's actually also the fact that people are not able to translate that desire into actual marriage rates.
I mean, the Family Trends Report 2025 also notes a decline in marriages ending before their 10th anniversary. What are some of the main drivers of this improvement?
Okay, so that's the bright side, right? Of all of that sort of negative news of the declining marriage rates. But we see that there's a decline in divorce before the 10th anniversary. I think that that's also to do with some of the things that we've been talking about, which is the age of marriage, people pushing back marriages. There's a strong relationship between when you get married and how long the marriage lasts and the probability of divorce. So I think that as people push back the time they get married, the kind of probability of it dissolving goes down. So that may be part of it, that we're seeing people getting married when they are more kind of on stable ground and more mature.
But while early marriage dissolution has dropped, divorce rates overall increased slightly in 2024. How do you reconcile these two trends?
I wouldn't nitpick on, a slight difference from year to year. We always see these fluctuations in national statistics. We also have, slight changes in the cohort sizes, which can actually affect some of these rates that you calculate or the number of divorces that you see. So I think that, the main thing is to focus on the long-term, noticeable change that's happening year after year after year after year. So if you see a slight spike, a very smallish one from year to year, there's no need to kind of like start getting excited over it unless you see that quite a few years in consecutively that you see that thing happening.
Right. Well, meanwhile, Singapore's total fertility rate remained the same in 2024 from the previous year at 0.97. Now, the 0.97 rate was a historic low back in 2023, falling from 1.04 in 2022 and 1.12 in 2021. How worrying is this declining trend, Dr. Tan?
I'll be honest, Hongbin, is not great news. It's not a good thing that for us to have such a low fertility rate. For the reason being that it's not just a matter of us not being able to replace ourselves, it's also the rate at which this is happening, the speed of change. If it is happening too fast, it's going to make it very difficult for society, for the economy, for social structures, support structures to adjust to this new reality. So for there to be such a massive change in cohort sizes year to year is really very worrying. So I would say that is definitely something that policymakers have to pay a lot of attention to.
Well, with childlessness rising and two-child families declining, are we seeing the start of a new norm in family structures, Dr. Tan?
I think that you've hit upon something. I think that what we're seeing with the low fertility rate is driven by all these, what part of it is actually, as we already talked about, the bad kind of like negative economic climate, not conducive, right? And on top of that, we also see a lot of technological driven changes in businesses, in the economy that's driving uncertainty. So I think that that could be something that is a more of a chronic issue, as well as I think if you look at these trends that you're talking about, the rise in childlessness, it is actually pointing at what could be an ongoing, a continual evolution of the demographic transition. So in other words, we see that the fertility rates have declined across the world. But what we don't know is whether that we are reaching kind of the trough, whether we have kind of hit upon something which is closer to a stable population. What this continual decline is telling us is that perhaps not yet. We haven't, we're still seeing continual change in the way that people looking at marriage, how they think about having kids, would usually the way that people might have thought about in the past would be that we're not having enough children, and that's a lot to do with how expensive it is. Maybe going forward, there are new reasons rising, such as, actually more people saying they don't even want to experience parenthood is something that a new norms emerge. And with that, it becomes harder to kind of reverse these downward trends.
Then what are the implications of this shift for the aging population and dependency ratio?
I think that the biggest problem is actually the speed of change. If you look at how we're going to manage, a lot of it has to do with what actions we take. What are our plans as an aging population? Knowing that our dependency ratio is going to go up quickly, what are the initiatives that we can put forward so that any kind of pressure on our support structures, informal or formal, whether how we can be buttressed and help to make sure that they're going to be very strong. So I think that this makes it more difficult, really, to manage that. There's going to be more pressures, less time to do so, more risk-taking perhaps required because you don't have the time to kind of test things out before you put them in. So I think that ultimately this just introduces a lot more need for there to be a social response. So there's a lot of coordination, a lot of cooperation needed across society, not just from the government, but really I think across society.
Right. Well, Minister for Social and Family Development, Masagos Zulkifli, said in a speech at the National Family Festival appreciation event yesterday that we can do more to assure couples if they do choose to start a family. Now, Singapore has come up with policies over the years to encourage people to have more children. Are the current policies, though, enough to move the needle on fertility? What more needs to be done, Dr. Tan?
I think it's arguable, really, that the current policies already have sort of moved the needle in helping to make sure that we don't, we don't actually fall into the abyss, which might have been actually what would have happened if we hadn't put these policies in place. We could be more similar to Seoul, which has a far lower fertility. So I think the greatest strength, perhaps, is that the policies have undergone a series of revisions, meaning that there is, a kind of agility in terms of the policy space to kind of like constantly revise and update and be flexible to respond to the needs of families. But I think that, as you mentioned, that could be more to be done. I think that people still feel that having children, requires a lot of juggling. I mean, time pressure, and the kind of work-life balance front still continues to be something that parents continue to talk about. So when you have children, you have to juggle work and, especially when they're younger, it can be require you to kind of put in a lot of time in the family, and therefore the support from workplaces is really crucial. So I think that making sure that there is a kind of more time given to families to spend together so that we can improve relationships, so that people can have more time to enjoy having a large family, enjoy having being with their young children. They're so adorable, helping people to enjoy that wonderful kind of process of building a family. That could be something that would make Singapore, I think, even a better place to live.
Right. I mean, some great insights from you here. Before we let you go here, Dr. Tan, if these trends continue, what will Singapore's population profile look like in 30 years?
In 30 years, that's a really long time late. So I think that one thing about Singapore, of course, is that we increasingly internationalizing. The number of people who have a parent who is not Singaporean parent married somebody who is not Singaporean and live in Singapore, that's increasing. We have more binational families in Singapore. We also have people who, coming into Singapore. So I think one thing that I really expect to see is that, we'll kind of change in terms of that background, where there'll be kind of new people coming into Singapore in terms of population profile. So how our population profile looks like depends on these kind of initiatives, how we want to manage the people who come into Singapore to work and live. And so that's going to be an increasingly big part, because the cohort sizes of Singaporean babies is going to get smaller. So if these trends continue, that's what it's going to look like. So that's the first thing. Another thing, of course, is that the number of people who are older, they're going to have more Singaporeans who are older.
Some great insights from you there. Thank you so much, Dr. Tan, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was Dr. Tan Poh Lin, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies at the National University of Singapore. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.